Kia ora. Thank you for watching this presentation on Indigenous Worldviews to inform participatory creativity. My name is Ricardo Sosa. I'm from Mexico, from the western side of Mexico, a state called Michoacán, where the Purépecha indigenous group has lived for many years. What I'm including in this paper, in this presentation, comes from years from the mid-1990s, years of experience. I've been fortunate enough to be in several projects working with remote indigenous communities in design projects. And this is my heritage. These are personal photographs of my family that come from this ethnic group. So the paper comes from realizing a disconnect, personally realizing a disconnect between my worldview and how the schooling system, including design education at university, didn't reflect some of those values. So years and years after, I've seen around the world in design schools this narrow dominant underlying account of how ideas are created, how we create things and recreate things as designers. And I perceive that there is a dominant singular way of looking at the creative process. And I think now, after 20 years, I've been able to start to articulate where this disconnect is. So the question in this paper is, how may indigenous stories of creation aid in the decolonization of creativity in design? And the aim is to arrive at a process of mutual liberation following Paulo Freire's work, and extending to the Zapatistas' work in the 1990s in Mexico to try to build a world of design where many worlds fit. So as I said, this is a very personal and design-oriented inquiry of Purépecha mythology. So this comes from lived experience and from design reading of these stories or these myths of creation in the Purépecha culture. The first point to notice is that creation for Purépecha is not an individual thing that one god created, but a process where a group of creators engaged and participated and interacted, negotiated to create the world and to create nature and humans. It wasn't a one sort of like linear process, top-down process of creation, but it involved multiple trials, multiple attempts, multiple efforts, until 3-4 more times until they arrived at what they were looking for. But also, it's not only a singular process of creation, as in before nothing existed and then after everything existed, but more a process of cycles of creation and destruction. So for many Mesoamerican or Latin American myths or stories of creation, destruction is as important and as prevalent as creation. In these stories, there is no primacy of humans over nature, so the world is not created for humans and their enjoyment and their control. There is a close connection and close relationship between the world and the underworld, and creation is seen as an unfinished journey. So what are some of the principles that we can derive from these stories of, and I'm talking about Mayan, Aztec, but mainly Purépecha stories of creation, which of course they share some elements, but they are also very unique. The first one is that they don't create from scratch. There is no such idea as creating everything from scratch, but it's more a process of building on what exists. Coordination and negotiation between different people, not only between like a set of gods and goddesses, but also collaboration and interaction with animals and with matter to create humans and to create other elements in nature. It's a very situational and opportunistic way of creating, of making, as opposed to an all-powerful kind of like top-down way of creating. It's iterative. As I said before, multiple trials, multiple cycles, and there are emergent results of the creation. There is an acknowledgement of unintended consequences. So not always the creative process or the process of creation going according to expectations. And it's a journey that is full of emotions and serendipity. All right, so all of those elements from ancient stories of creation can help us to question. So I'm not saying that we should leave behind or replace ways of creating, but rather that we need to bring more and more diverse understandings of creation. So the first view is, how do we question, how do we complement and enrich this rather patriarchal way of seeing creativity and creation from a single individualistic, mostly obviously represented as a male creator god. In design, we have this very strong culture of working in projects that have a well-defined beginning, a well-defined end, and I think there is a space to question this idea of episodic projects and more to understand design more as an ongoing cyclic process. It helps us to question ideas of ownership of ideas. Obviously, it complements human-centeredness in design. In the Bible, the world is created for humans, and in these stories of creation, it's not. Also, I think it's worth questioning specializations, obviously inside design, so graphic, product, industrial design as specializations that actually start to look at a problem or a project already establishing and already knowing what type of outcome will result from the project. But also spreading outside design and realizing that these type of projects are absolutely not only about design, but about every other discipline and profession out there and occupation. It also questions ideas of control and agency in design that we have very embedded, and I developed those more in detail in the paper. And I think very importantly, of course, it also questions this idea that design schools are very good at reinforcing of individual talent. And if you look at the creative process, a lot of people keep, even in 2020, they keep talking about this stage of illumination. I think that's a very, very strong connection outside of any religious belief, but rather as a view of how we create ideas and how we create the world. That is very connected to Western beliefs. And also, I think importantly, and I'm going to develop this further later, but as questioning the means as well as the ends. So in participatory design, I see a lot of talk and a lot of work around what people design, so non-commercial social design. But there is very, very few conversations about how we design and how we transform the process of design to perhaps suit better participatory mindset. So these are takeaways that directly are relevant to participatory design. I do believe that based on these ideas, we need to rethink the curriculum in design schools. We cannot keep educating designers as if there was one single valid design process that can be applied either to commercial projects or participatory projects. Regardless, I think we need to be a lot more mindful of the variety of processes and ways of creating that we need to include in design education and design research. We need to move from a banking education to a more dialogical education. And of course, I make reference to Paulo Freire's distinction between banking and dialogical. We need to acknowledge and help students and communities that we work with to prioritize their local philosophies and their histories, as opposed to bringing one view of design to these projects. To acknowledge that participation includes many ways of creating, and to advance towards the three principles of partnership, participation, and protection, and how we translate or move those from research into design practice and design education. And I think it's fundamental to make visible, to work with people to help them make visible their privilege, their biases, and acculturation. And I say this because a lot of design schools in countries like Mexico, they tend to attract urban middle-class students that are rather followers of the European school of design and creation in design activity, and they forget and they disregard those that are closest to them in their own country. And as I said in the beginning, this is a project for mutual liberation. So it's not, we're not asking to replace or to change everything, but rather to enrich existing ways of seeing design. Kia ora. Thank you so much. This was me, and that's my name, Ricardo Sosa. My contact details. Thank you.